awesome. Thank you to the Dans, especially Dan Bliss for connecting with me way back forever ago. That was an awesome presentation, Rick. Hopefully I can follow somewhat in your footsteps. Also talking about shifting left and focus on developers today. I'll introduce myself really quickly. I am Mario Loria. I am a SRE at CartaX. I actually started at Carta proper. CartaX is a team within Carta working on a private marketplace. We are hiring, more on that later. You can check us out at cartax.com. And to check me out at marioloria.dev, I'm certified Kubernetes administrator and application developer. I'm a CNCF ambassador. I do lots in the Kubernetes world, and I really enjoy the kind of the cloud native consulting and mentorship around these concepts and what's coming, in the future of leveraging Kubernetes in cloud, et cetera. So I really love the community. You might have seen me speaking elsewhere or running around KubeCon, collecting as many socks and shirts as possible. I really love that stuff. I love the community, really active. Recently, I was actually doing the Cloud Native TV, which is the new Twitch stream that with multiple shows that CNCF is doing. So I really love this community. My pride and joy is Kubernetes, and that's kind of the world I live in. Today, as I said, we're going to be talking about the dawn of developer experience. This is something that has kind of clicked for me and my coworkers in very recent times as we've kind of taken a look back at our career and things that worked and didn't work and seen so many patterns that were destructive and did not lead to great outcomes for both the employees and the employer. Let's get started with what is DevX, and we're really going to be testing here how great my speaker notes are. This is going to be a little hairy. So really quick, when I started my career, I actually started working with a development team, kind of as a system administrator, and there was someone on that team that was like the star programmer. He was the guy, right? He was very experienced. He was older than everyone else, and I remember talking to him. And this is, around when Docker was starting to come out, and he's the guy that said, "Here's the wiki on how to build your Gentoo VMs from scratch, right? And all the stages from stage 0 on. Very time consuming, very heavy, right? Very systems oriented." And by the time I left that company a few years later, he was wearing a Docker shirt, and I attribute that to kind of my bringing in these new ideals of what can be done when we're building new services, new systems, and this idea that if we can abstract away the complexity, but if we can make it simpler, if we can shift left, right, put more power in the developers' hands, they can actually move faster and do things at a pace, at a velocity that is astounding compared to organizations that have red tape, very, very siloed teams, et cetera. And we'll get into that. So what is DevX? So the top part here is kind of what I wrote just off the top of my head, my one sentence. Basically, the more time engineers spend onboarding, bootstrapping, configuring, evaluating, all these things, asking for help, working through blockers, getting approvals, right? The less time they spend writing code. So if you think of the onboarding process, a new engineer, and this is a problem at every place I've been to, a new engineer has multiple variances in what they end up actually being at for a baseline of their understanding of what development looks like at that organization in their team, right? It's a little bit honed for their team, but there are still many different ways of them understanding what that looks like. And so from the bottom here, we have the developer experience gap. So very recently, I think it's just a couple months ago, there was a DevX conference that was put on by the people at GitPod, I think it is. And they sourced this kind of article from Stephen O'Grady, which does a much better job of kind of articulating what this is. And basically, developers are forced to borrow time from doing what they do best, which is writing code, and redirected to all of these other issues. And they're spending more time in Jira. They're spending more time in Slack, and they're spending more time dealing with local atrocities of software that we give them that they have to run on their laptops, or scripts that they need to wrangle together access to work on our Kubernetes clusters, or just learning Kubernetes, right? And that's kind of what they're saying here. So the way I think about this is SRE and SRE platform, DevOps teams, I lump them into kind of one. I'll say SRE here for the most part, since that's kind of what my title is and what I'm most acquainted with. those teams, they have dual responsibilities, okay? They both have to keep an infrastructure going, whether it's bare metal or a cloud infrastructure, right? They have to keep that going. They have to keep it up. Uptime has to be up, right? We don't want brownouts or blackouts. They also have another job, and that is literally be a support organization for developers, right? And try to build tools that, CI/CD pipelines and other things that developers would leverage to do their jobs, right? So we're already setting up any SRE team to really fail, right? Their scope is quite wide. And this is what I've seen throughout my career is most SRE teams just, they can't handle all of that. And so they go towards what they know best generally, which is more of the provisioning cloud infrastructure, some of the observability there. And they don't have time to deal with the developers and the platforms that they need, right? The platform as a service that, you might be trying to build for those developers. It more of becomes their ad hoc support for the developers. They're kind of thought of last in the chain of a developer putting something out, right? And I'll use developer and engineer roughly, like they mean the same thing when I use them. So what I like to think about is the focus for developer experience is the end-to-end experience of any engineer to develop, deploy, and operate their services. So I'm thinking more maybe Netflix model, if you've heard of that, where the service owners are the developers or the team, and they own that service. And what we need to enable them to do is these three things: develop, deploy, and operate their services wholly, right? We shouldn't have blocks where they have to do certain little things to get the events from their horizontal pod autoscaler object, right? Like we shouldn't have to do that. So this is kind of the mental model I use to approach developer experience. So these are just a few of some of the things. Like I'll say when I joined Carta end of last year, I actually spent about a month and a half interviewing and meeting people. And I mean, 10 meetings a day, some days, right? Just one-on-ones with people, taking copious amounts of notes, just listening, just soaking. And I took this consultant's mindset in terms of I'm coming in, I want to hear and soak and take in everything I can. I want to play around. I want to get a sense. And then I want to figure out where I live and what I can do. And I've worked in quality assurance, network engineering, system administration, a little bit security focus. I've been all around product people and leaders, delivery. So I have a good sense of what an engineering org really kind of needs to do to make sure the focus is appropriate for shipping quickly, stable code. And getting, moving the needle. So some of these things: onboarding pain, duplicated efforts, feeling of isolation. How is this problem still around? Why do I have to execute this crazy huge batch script to launch our monolith, which is kind of an important, thing? Why is it held together with little bits of thin wire? These are just some of the ways that developers feel. Meetings, Slack communication, reviewing work, trying to make pipelines work, figuring out random Kubernetes issues, just administrative pieces. Between all of that, if you really think about it, how much time is a developer actually hands on keyboard focus and writing code? So here's a few, and again, these are just a few causes. I just wanted to list these out to give people kind of a sense of the pieces that I'm thinking about that can attribute to poor developer experience. And most of these things are what happens when an organization gets bigger. They're going to happen. You can't really fight against them necessarily. What you can do is try to make them better, try to blunt their impact, right? Maintenance debt is one of them. Access hurdles, again, the security is not a bad thing. I think Rick made a good point. We have to shift left. We have to work in tandem by default, right? Excessive waiting. I needed that yesterday. An SRE says there's too busy to answer my requests. Recurring issues, repeated issues, talking too much. A very common one I see is we talk unicorn and rainbow scenarios for a really long time. And then nothing actually gets done. And I'll talk about working groups in a minute here. But those can lend to that disjointed communication. I've seen many a times at previous organizations that there's two actual distinct teams that don't talk to each other at all. They don't have to. There's nothing they really share, but they're literally doing the exact same project. right? And it might be rolling out Kafka. It might be tuning GraphQL. It might be looking into service mesh, right? And maybe it's evaluation. They're going through the stages, right? So a lot of these are causes. There's many more. And I actually have an internal paper I wrote that I'm working on adapting for external consumption on what it would look like to build a DevX team. I'll get to that later. But the feeling you end up having is, did I actually do anything today? What even am I trying to do? I'm not making progress toward my goal, right? And that's one of the worst feelings, I think, because you feel like you did all these things that should be building the foundation or building the stack for you to then just do your job. But it seems like those never really end. It just, week by week, it seems like there's more headache. And you just have to, trudge through the mud as best you can. So this is one of my favorite gifts. This is literally how I feel every morning before I drink my coffee. And it's usually when I read the news, which is a pretty low effort thing. So let's talk quickly about SRE teams, and kind of the default thinking here is, okay, well, what do we, why is an SRE solving this? My platform team is there. There's 4, 5, 6 people on the team. Why can't they do that? Well, there's some relationship pieces that we need to understand. SRE teams, they are the platform owners, right? They built this foundation by which an engineer lives. Okay. They're kind of this critical dependency. And so developers have to go to SREs for anything. Okay, SREs don't go lay this red carpet out for developers and say, this is the beautiful thing that you can work with, and it's tuned perfectly from a UX perspective, and it's intuitive, and it makes sense, and you have power and control over your service and what you want to do. That's not generally how it works. So SRE teams, they learn about developers' workflow from the developers. They're not trying to build on the monolith, right? That's not something they're doing. When they're in their terminal or their VS Code, they're writing Terraform, right? So the primary focus is not exactly there. They're focused on all these other pieces: maintenance, security, compliance, protocols, cloud infrastructure. Is gRPC working? Why are my node groups failing? How do we dial in cluster autoscaler? These are other things. So SRE becomes these 5 points, which I really can get behind. I've seen these in every organization. They're a support group, they're a dumping ground, they're delayed in a lot of cases, they aren't performing well. They almost seem like a third-party team. It's like a consultant team that you put in a support ticket with, and hopefully, hopefully it gets done. So it's really tricky. And this is the mantra in an SRE's head, these developers and their problems, that this just isn't a priority. I have other stuff to do that's more important. Generally, foundational project work that is going to span a month or two, right? Getting EKS set up. Well, you're a Snowflake. What you want is very unique. No one else has this need. I haven't heard about it, so you must be the only one with this need. And SRE is not at fault for this. I'm not saying the SRE engineers hate developers, but they can't do 2 jobs, and we're asking them to, right? And obviously they will defer to something they know best, something they're kind of there to do, which is build that infrastructure, build that platform, manage that platform. So we're overburdening them, right? Any team can fall into these kind of mantras as you self-prioritize and focus on what your team needs to do, which you're a team. You're supposed to focus on what you are supposed to do. What is your mission, right? What is your North Star as a team? So a lot of people have told me, a lot of leaders actually think this is true. There's this idea of eventual consistency, which is basically saying we are solving the foundational problems with infrastructure enhancements, new tech, new tools that we're trying out, making provisioning easier with Terraform. And that's actually really never solving any of the problems. It's actually sometimes adding more problems, but more so it's kind of keeping things at a plateau, a kind of a straight line. The reason for that is that using AKS instead of COPS and bleeding in some security elements has nothing to do with the developer workflow and their 0 to 100 of starting to code and then getting something shipped and then canary releasing it and then rolling it back and then verifying it's auto-scaling and all of those other components. A lot of that doesn't matter, right? So some of the things they're working on are not necessarily moving the needle. They're actually more so like tech debt pieces that aren't even really needed that badly, but they're new and shiny and they make sense. So the rest of the reasons here why this is rarely the case kind of makes sense, right? An SRE is not going to understand the full-on kind of bucket of work involved, right? They're going to understand the thin key point, which they might not have interest in. They're going to lack the scale of the importance to the organization at a wider level, right? Their solutions might be short-term limited solutions. Let me write a really quick for loop for that. And in the midst of everything, they're already underwater and they're already splitting their focus. So that's not ideal. So what are some of the solutions that we generally look at for this? For solving DevX, how do we focus a little bit more on that? And both of these have pros and cons. One is let's inflate the SRE team. And what I've seen is kind of a model where the SRE team, let's think maybe a platform team instead, and then there's different focus. So there's SRE observability, there is cloud infrastructure and provisioning, and then there might be developer experience. There might even be like a DevSecOps group in that as well. And those groups are all kind of under the same platform heading, and thus they can all kind of mesh very quickly, rapidly. And like I said here, close collaboration is easy. They can see both sides a lot easier. Again, this Devex-focused group, these people are working through getting the monolith running on their laptop, doing remote development, right? Doing the other pieces that a developer cares about. But of course, there's wavering focus, and of course, increased scope. What happens if something in the cloud infra space or the observability space, there's some help needed? They're going to pull other people in because DevX has always seemed in the past as something that's not a priority, right? It's one of those things that's hard to kind of measure. We'll get to that later. The other side of this is a dedicated developer experience team. And part of my paper I wrote internally was on how you would build a developer experience team in an organization, Carta size over 1,000 people and growing. And this kind of exclusive focus. So remember I mentioned the relationship that developers have with SREs, right? It's I'm a developer, I need help, I go to SRE. In this model, a developer experience team would actually go to the developers, right? And they would work with the developers constantly. They kind of work in tandem with them in parallel to understand exactly what's going on at any juncture throughout the workflow, right? And what they're trying to do. And they'd have a little bit more native autonomy. They'd be developers themselves by default in background. There's a lot of problems with this. One of them is hiring is hard to begin with. Hiring SREs is hard to begin with. Hiring great developers is hard to begin with. That's hard to really execute. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk about just a few things today, cultural ideas and principles, right? For how you can, maybe an SRE team, a platform team, yourself, whatever you're doing at the organization, like you can help make the developer experience better, okay? So I probably should have filtered these slides before I full sended these, but really, like it sounds like this sort of thing, is going to be super easy. It's going to make a lot of sense. It's not. It sounds like you'll be able to do these tomorrow and you'll get dividends in a week. Nope, that's not the case. So it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of conversations. It's going to take a lot of proposals and kind of writing out your ideas and working with others to figure out where we want to go and why. So from that DevX conf I mentioned from a few months ago, they have a manifesto. In their manifesto, they are trying to basically say here, I have some of these underlined, we're starting to think as bigger organizations, as bigger platform teams, bigger development teams, right, that are very sprawling, more about design, style, and taste for the tools that we use, not just, I need a tool that does this one thing, right? So we're starting to be a little bit more methodical and creative. And so the key things there are, well, we want to delight, and we need to do that by reducing friction and really boosting automation, because we want to actually make everything below the surface, right? Everything in the background that's just doing the thing for you, we want to make it just work, just boring, right? So I'm going to move a little bit fast. I think I'm getting close to time, maybe 5-6 minutes left. So I want to build developers who are fully aware, responsible, and confident in their ability to deploy services. Actually, that ... is develop, deploy, and operate, right? Those are the three keywords I used to think of this, right? So I want every developer. And the big thing here, the big word here is empowerment, right? We're not empowering our developers. They actually don't feel like they have any control over anything except for the laptop in front of them that's physical. And that's not how things should work, right? In this modern kind of microservices, service-oriented world, a developer is a service owner. They should feel like they wholly understand what is going on from start to finish with their service. And that's in production as well, right? And obviously there's different gates based on the company and security concerns and things like that. But if we are going to enable developers to have true ownership, we have to provide the tooling and the support and the access, and help them do that, right? A lot of times you'll get this developer trying to do something, goes to SRE, says I'm trying to do this, and the SRE team says thanks for creating your service, but in reality that's not going to work in production. You need X, Y, and Z. X is documented like 1/10 over here. For Y, you can probably mimic that PR, but like there's a few little nuances you have to work on. And then Z is something that we'll probably have to do it for you. I don't know when, right? And that's the interaction that you get. And that is not going to work long term, right? You can tell right now how fun your job will be when you leave for that day and you go home and you feel like, great, more things to deal with. So here's a few areas to consider. So I think about developer experience. If I think about the kind of problem space, it's in make life easier, right? It's not like a tangible, like, oh, we're going to boost uptime, right? Or we're going to reduce our error budget, right? It's not like that. In the long run, it will. But some of these areas, both kind of technical, harder skills and the team dynamics, softer skills or softer implementations of things that you can do right now to start considering for these things. And all of these things matter, all of them. In some case, depending on your organization, onboarding variants might matter. New service provisioning, right? The StockX, we had 100 services and growing, and we'd have a new service every week. And it would take a developer 2 weeks to create a new service. So environment sprawl is a huge one. Access barriers. I think listening is, I didn't put it on the slide, listening is a big one. I want to double down here on engineering workshops and demos. I think showing people something live is incredibly powerful. Getting a conversation going. Co-located SRE, I won't get into that. I started at Carta as a co-located SRE, embedded SRE, and that was tricky. So let's move on to innovation. So when I wrote about how to create a developer experience team, the idea was more so that it should be a product team. And I like to think about kind of teams and companies, and like they're either kind of in a high innovation curve or they're in a high efficiency curve, but not both, right? And so sometimes there's balance, but actually for what we want, we actually want high innovation, right? We don't care about efficiency. We don't want our developer experience team members or the people focused on those pieces to be just fixing all these little things necessarily, right? We actually want them to look for the really high impact, innovative projects that can be high value, right? And it might take a little while to get those to a state where they can be used, but it's a lot less than you might think. So working groups are super important. Working groups can spawn a ton of amazing feedback and collaboration. However, leaders, you should not expect working groups to actually produce output. That's not what they do. They meet, they talk about things, they bring together the thought leaders in an organization. You need them. And a lot of the things that you can work on, there's probably a working group for already. There might be multiple. Iteration is important. Experimentation is incredibly important here. The fine line of fix it versus create something new or innovative. Is it supplemental, right? Is it something that I'm fixing a bash script? Is it something that can plug and play to our current processes so we're not uplifting everything we're doing already? So I'm going to mention a few tools here in the cloud native world that are helping work toward these patterns. There's a lot more on the horizon. These are just a few. These are what myself and my team are looking at right now as well. Crossplane, many of you might have heard of it. The idea here is to provide a kind of Kubernetes add-on that lets you assemble infrastructure from kind of any vendor with just some basic high-level self-service APIs, right? And those exist in Kubernetes as CRDs. And this quote here, build your internal infrastructure from abstractions on top of CRDs that Crossplane provides. So think of your developer making a very simple YAML manifest, or there's something UI bound that they can create that with. It creates it for them that says I need an RDS database with Postgres version 9.13. It needs to have encryption and it needs to be in 2 regions, right? That's something they don't have to log into AWS console for. They don't need AWS CLI installed on their system. It's all done via operators and controllers running in Kubernetes. That's what Crossplane provides. This is incredibly powerful. Those operators are kind of reconciliation loop, just similar to Kubernetes. And again, I enjoy Terraform, but I think this is the next generation of how we shift left. We enable developers and we stop writing Terraform and putting Terraform in every microservice repo, et cetera. Another one is Backstage from Spotify. This is a really, really promising project. I put some bullet points there for some of the key things it offers. We have not played with actually any of these yet that I'm mentioning, but we're definitely looking at them and playing with them now. Maybe I'll come back and visit. Backstage.io, definitely check this out. They've done talks at previous KubeCons. I would find those. The last one I will mention, which just went version 1.0, just kind of released, is the Ambassador. So Ambassador used to have an API gateway. Ambassador Developer Control Plane. They also do telepresence, which actually allows you to hybrid develop. So you can tap into pods running in a cluster and actually have traffic directed to a service running on your laptop as well if you wanted to. So it really helps you test and hot reload fashion. So they have a developer control plane product they're working on. Again, code, ship, run is similar to my mental develop, deploy, operate, right? And you can see the dev is the first 3 blocks, the deploy, and then the run, if you will, or operate is the last 3 blocks here. And they work especially well with Argo, which is a fantastic tool. So how do we measure all of this? And I'm going to try to breeze through this really, really quick. The DORA metrics are basically a set of DevOps related metrics for measuring the performance of development teams, right? And it's kind of weird, but it's this idea of like, are we enabling these teams to do what they need to do and giving them the tool sets to really enable their workflow, right? With this, we look at deployment frequency, how often an organization deploys, lead time, amount of time it takes to get a commit into production, change failure rate, percentage of deployments causing a failure in production, time to restore, how long it takes an organization to restore from a failure, etc. I added a couple others that I like. Microservice bootstrap time I mentioned before. I think that's really important. And then employee net promoter score. That's like a one question. I actually more so surveying and getting a baseline or a current state. And then desired state, right? And being able to measure that based on a survey of sentiment. I think there's some value to that. We're working on doing that right now. More to come on that. Really quick, parting principles. Keep things boring. Focus on business logic and features. Try not to do too many things at once. Functional ephemeral environments is amazing. Like more functional environments, don't just add environments because we need another environment. Outward and overly communicated processes and what's going on with the team. Build champions to your causes is huge in the working group model. And then these other pieces, self-service, self-sufficient, that's key one. Service level. Think about everything from a service level. Don't think about the cluster. Don't think about the other cloud components. Think about the service. What is the cost for the service? It's pipeline, it's RDS database, it's compute. And then education, which I think is the silver bullet in one-upping your teams. My name is Mario. One-upping your teams to the next level. I don't have a lot of time for questions. I will take any questions that come at me. I talked way too much probably and not about the right things. Hopefully you got some value out of this. Feel free to DM me or reach out to me on Twitter at Mario P. Loria. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan's and everyone else at DevOps-Exchange.